Okay, well, it's 2 minutes past 2, so we'll make a start. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined to this webinar. We're going to talk about the circular economy, but we're going to look at it through the auction industry and how the auction industry can really be a strong force to drive the circular economy. I'll just introduce myself first. My name is Chris Thompson. I'm a consultant. I've been working with the Bidpath team for around a year now. My background is in marketing, many years in marketing for fast-moving consumer goods companies operating at board level, but also I have a master's in sustainability and environmental management. And what I'm very passionate about is how we can integrate sustainability into brand and company strategy, but in a really kind of central and powerful way. So not as an add-on as a lot of companies do, which is more about sort of positioning rather than being integral to the business. But I believe it has to be fully integrated and fully central to brand and company strategy. And I'm pleased to say that's very much the ethos of the team at Bidpath, and that is exactly what we're working to do. So that's sort of an introduction to who I am. And I'm going to be hosting this event on behalf of the Bidpath team and also some of the guests who I'll describe in a moment. So what we're going to do today is, after this very brief introduction that we've got two speakers from the Bidpath team. We've got George and Nicolette, and they're going to talk about who Bidpath are as a company, what they do as a company, and how the auction industry and Bidpath specifically can really drive the circular economy and can be a real force for good in that. But also sort of extending out from that in terms of sustainability more broadly, because obviously circular economy is really powerful. It has loads of benefits, but there are other elements to sustainability as well. So George and Nicolette are going to do that. Then after that, we've got two guest speakers. We've got Dan Main from a company called CA Global Partners, who are experts in reverse logistics or surplus asset management. There's different ways of describing that. And Dan's going to talk about how CAGP as a company, but also that industry can also really drive sustainability and the circular economy. And then we're going to have a pickup from Saunders Auctioneers, talking about Saunders as an auctioneer, who are one of the country's leading fine art auctioneers, and she's going to talk about Saunders as a business, but also some of the great work they're doing from a sustainability point of view. So we've got four short presentations, which are going to hopefully expand on the what I think is an amazing breadth and scope that the auction industry can offer. And certainly over the last year, it has opened my eyes. I had very little appreciation of the industry before I started working with the Bidpath team, but now seeing the scope, the breadth, the power, the scale, I really appreciate the force for good that the auction industry can be in terms of circularity, but also in terms of sustainability. So we've got those four presentations. Then we're going to move into some discussion and question and answers. So please, as we go through this presentation, there's a couple of things I'd ask. Firstly, if you can keep your video off and keep on mute, because that'll make it easier for us to manage the presentations. But also, if you have any questions, if you put them in the chat function, we'll pick those up, and then I will put them to the panel at the end. So we've roughly got about 30 minutes of presentation and then 30 minutes to have a discussion and questions and answers. And please feel free to put anything in that chat. So without any more preamble, I'm going to hand over to George Wade, who is the Director of Strategic Relationships at Bidpath. George has a very long and rich track record in the auction industry, and has really seen this transition into kind of virtual digital auction technology over the last 15 years. And he works with a lot of Bidpath's major global clients. So George is going to take us through what Bidpath does, and also how Bidpath and the auction industry can really start to drive circularity and sustainability. So I'll hand over to George now.
Thank you very much, Chris. And yeah, as Bidpath, we're absolutely delighted to be here to present to you a little bit about Bidpath's place in the auction industry and how we empower our clients around the world using software. Bidpath's actually been around since 2001. And over all that time, as Chris said, it has been a huge digital transformation for auction houses. We're lucky enough to work with over 750 auctioneers around the world in almost every country and across every sort of auction vertical you can imagine, from industrial and commercial auctions to fine art and antiques, right through to charity auctions, which we'll touch on later on. And we are very fortunate to have huge volumes of assets that flow through our platforms and keeping those items in the circular economy. Over $2 billion worth of assets facilitated through our software last year being sold. That equated to over 2 million auction lots, which actually equates to far more individual items, so several million items last year, which otherwise could have ended up in all sorts of different areas. Instead, they're being reused, recycled, and staying in the circular economy. And we're passionate at Bidpath about that, and the position we have to try and encourage our auctioneers to spread the message of what a good position auction houses have in the circular economy. And it's something we're all passionate about increasing and presenting on days like today to really show how important auctions are. Again, as Chris said, the technology world in auctions has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. Many of our clients are still physical auction premises where they have live events and people will attend those live events. But we're one of the pioneers behind the webcast technology. So allowing people, instead of having to travel huge distances to visit an auction and not know whether they're going to be successful or not, in many scenarios, they can now stay at home, watch the auction, take part in the auction, and if they're successful, they can then arrange the goods to be shipped to them in a more sustainable way, rather than everybody having to drive to auction houses up and down the countries. So that is definitely one of our sort of USP, our webcast technology and how that's expanded over the years. We also offer fully online only technology. So especially through the COVID years, many auctioneers had to shut their doors to the general public and move their businesses entirely online. And we now have a nice balance of auctioneers who are back to doing live events, but others who are fully running themselves as an online only business. And finally, we also control the sort of backbone software technology for auction houses, including the invoicing, the accounting packages, and right through to the sort of cataloging applications, really trying to improve efficiencies for auction houses. And one of our key drivers at the moment is to see if we can help the auction world move to a paperless experience. So we're lucky we've got some pioneering auction houses who are welcome to come on that journey with us and encouraging us to develop our product along those lines. Thank you. As I mentioned, over 750 different auctioneers around the world, but just to touch on a couple of very quick case studies before we get into the other speakers, and Nicolette tells us a little bit more about Bidpath's position in the circular economy. But British Medical Auctions, quite a niche example for us, but we work with a number of the leading medical auctioneers around the world. British Medical Auctions particularly will source their goods from hospitals or NHS trusts. Again, a real problem when those assets are becoming end of life in the UK market, how they're dealt with. British Medical Auctions solve that problem for the hospitals or NHS trusts by actually taking those goods away, reselling them to their network, either in the UK or overseas, or sometimes into other crossover industries as well, meaning that those items, very, very high-end, important medical equipment in some circumstances, are going to other countries and are being reused or dealt with in a sustainable way. In the middle of the screen, Shepherd's Auctioneers, a good example of one of our retail returns auctioneers. So a huge problem in the e-commerce world is the number of returned goods that we're all sending back every day when we don't like it or it doesn't fit or there's an issue with the item. Many of those returned products are not suitable to be resold by those marketplaces or the manufacturer. Auction houses play a crucial role in dealing with that returned product. So an awful lot of items will end up with auction houses like Shepherd's by the pallet load or the lorry load. They will split those up. They'll work out what is resellable as quality goods. Other goods that are possibly not able to be sold to end users will go to trade buyers who will then upcycle, recycle, resell that product. And again, playing a really important part in making sure those assets aren't scrapped or wasted. And then finally, I touched on charity auctions. Charity auctions have always been a great way for charities to raise money. It's lovely to see that that is proving just as popular in 2022 as it has been throughout the life of auctions. And we always encourage and work with our auction houses to use our technology for charity benefits. And already this year, some of our clients have raised over £140,000 through charity auctions, and we'll have a very busy charity calendar throughout the rest of the year. We have a flagship charity client called Wild and Art, and they actually put on fantastic events in cities all around the UK. You've probably seen animal sculptures popping up in towns and cities, decorated by local artists. They usually put them on a trail over the summer, which gets lots of community engagement, huge numbers of visits for people visiting those cities. And at the end of the summer, they're typically auctioned off in a huge charity auction, often making several £100,000 their charity auctions. One we've just highlighted there was Go Wild Gorillas in Jersey back in 2019 for the Dole Foundation. And in one evening, they raised over £1.1 million for the charity. So the technology and the charity aspect of what we do is hugely important to Bidpath as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. That was a great introduction, I think, to the starting to tease out the scope of what Bidpath does and how auctions can cross across so many different sectors. I'm going to hand over now to Nicolette, who's a marketing manager at Bidpath. And Nicolette brings some sort of unique experience to the team as well, because she did a degree in circular economy and sustainable business models. And she's really been, at the forefront of the team in terms of driving even more circularity and sustainability into everything that we do. So I'm going to hand over to Nicolette now.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you everybody for coming to join today. So the first bit, I just want to quickly touch on. So at Bidpath, we've got 4 ESG pillars that we follow. So protecting the planet, helping our people thrive, leading governments and management, and being the change in society. So these 4 things are sort of a key focus for the things that we do and a lot of the things that we are structuring moving forward. Some of that includes beach cleans that we are doing globally across our different teams, food bank volunteering, and also just measuring the carbon output of everything and figuring out how we can better ourselves in that way. And then, of course, the other aspect to what we do, as well as we really want to create more conversations around circular economy and the way auctions are linked to it, which is why we are here today. So now I'll talk a little bit more about circular economy. So as you can see on the left side here, that is a linear form of consumption, make, take, waste. Auction-driven consumption, which you can see on the right-hand side, follows quite a number of different loops. There's 4 main loops that we have denoted: the auction loop, the repair loop, the upcycling loop, and the recycling loop. And this is a model actually that we've created here at Bidpath, and it is sort of loosely inspired by the butterfly model created by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So on the first loop, we've got what we call the auction loop. So this kind of covers everything and anything that enters an auction in this circular system. For this example, you can look at high value items such as art, antiques, collectibles, and these type of items actually can essentially stay infinitely within this loop of the circular model. Because these items are not function based, they generally wouldn't really degrade. They're collectibles, so people will keep them in mint condition. And so therefore, as long as the demand for it remains, they can essentially go in and out of auction till the end of time. So very, very simple, but ideally everything would sort of cascade back into this innermost loop of the model. So then from the auction loop, you then go to the repair loop. So this is where items that have a function based to them come into the model. So that would cover cars, electronics, machinery, all the way up to big heavy equipment. People that would bid on these items in an auction oftentimes are bidding on them with the intention of repairing them. And after repairing them, they could either go to resell it independently or make it good as new and re-enter it back into the auction. So in this example, we've talked about classic cars because you do see that a lot. And that's pretty much the repair loop. Next, which is the upcycling loop, which Dan will touch on a bit more as CA Global Partners has some very interesting real life examples of it. But basically, these are the items that get sent to auction. It might be something that is either no longer functioning, it reaches its end of life, and there's not much more of a purpose for it. But still people will buy it. Sometimes people like to buy scrap metal or other kinds of things, and there's always a use for something. In this case, bidders would buy with the intention of upcycling, and they basically take that item, turn it into something else, or they'd resell it as an art piece or whatever. And then finally, the outermost loop of our model would be the recycling loop or the asset redistribution loop. And this is often seen with industrial, commercial, and machinery level of auctions. So in this example, we've talked about a piece of machinery that was sent to auction. Maybe the plant closed down or something. Bidder purchased the item. They could disassemble it and recycle it, or find different ways to redistribute those material components. They could send it to a remanufacturing facility to be refurbished and resold, or they could refurbish it in-house and again, enter it back into the auction loop. Again, Dan is also going to share some really interesting real life examples that he's seen on some projects that he's been involved with over the last few years. So that's it from me.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Nicolette. I think that's find a really helpful way to look at the industry, the 4 different loops, because certainly, as I said before, being relatively new to the industry, probably the only one I was aware of before I started working with the Bidpath team was the first one, the sort of more the kind of fine art, that auction loop. And actually then understanding the other 3 loops really starts to demonstrate the kind of the breadth and scope of the entire industry. So we're going to hand over to Dan now, who's actually going to talk a lot more about those other loops. Dan, Business Development Director for CAGP, and has done a huge range of kind of really diverse and really interesting projects over the last few years, which sort of really bring to life those 3 different loops of how the auction industry can drive the circular economy. So I'll hand over to Dan now.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, as Chris said, CA Global Partners, we were founded in 1997. We provide auctions, valuations, private treaty sales to a range of industrial clients. Our headquarters is in California, but we've got offices in UK and Europe, Australia as well. And yeah, we work with a real range of different companies, different industries. I've worked in the industry for 17 years. I've worked on projects as diverse as selling Humvees from the US military, closing a diamond mine in the Arctic Circle in Canada, through to our very recent audiovisual and broadcast sale, one of the biggest of its kind in the UK, Arena Television. So yeah, a real breadth of what we cover. So we're using the term surplus asset management here, but you'll hear a few similar terms that mean broadly the same thing: reverse logistics, reverse supply chain, investment recovery. What we're really talking about is taking equipment or stock that is surplus to an organization's requirements and enabling it to be reused elsewhere. We've got the process that we generally go through detailed here. You're trying to identify what is surplus in the first place, get the details of that and allow it to be either redeployed internally with a company or sold externally. It may be donated for free. And occasionally we do see that things are recycled. However, I would say that's pretty much the last resort. It's fairly rare that we'd get as far as raw material recycling in a sale. For companies that think, well, we don't think we have any surplus, it'd be interesting to note that in most surplus asset audits, for equipment in particular, it finds that around 10 to 20% of equipment is sitting idle. Now, we're talking about auctions today. Auctions are a tool within surplus asset management, which are extremely important because they allow us to maximize the value of an asset in a relatively short time scale. The benefit of an auction is it's date certain, it's time specific, the sale has to close on a given day. And what that means is that they can be used for transacting quite a large volume of surplus assets. If you have regular surplus, probably the best example would be the UK or US military, who produce vast amounts of surplus on a daily basis. Most of that is worked through with an auction type process. So it's worth mentioning this is not a new business area. Industrial auctions of surplus of some kind have been around for over 100 years. It's just that more recently we've linked it in with the circular economy benefits that are clearly a part of this. If you think the traditional 2 benefits of surplus asset management were the bottom 2 circles, generating revenue and reducing costs. The revenue, obviously, from selling an idle asset. The costs, it costs money to hold an idle asset. You've got to store it, insure it, and maintain it as well. These ventures, when companies are undertaking them, it's generally self-funding at the very least, and more often than not, it's profit generating, from this reduction in cost and generation of revenue. But when you add in the benefit of circular economy, of circulating products and materials, you've got a hugely powerful combination here of something that's affecting the bottom line, but also introducing aspects of circular economy into a business. So what does this look like in practice? Well, in 2018, following the closure of Heathrow Terminal 1, CA Global Partners held a webcast auction, so live bidding in the room as well as online. We had 4,000 bidders from 51 countries, about 500 of which were in the room, the other 3,500 all bidding online. There was the range of equipment from an airport terminal, as you can imagine, security equipment, baggage handling, but also signs, railings, light fittings. The security equipment went all over the world, 15 different airports, including some in developed economies that otherwise wouldn't have been able to purchase this equipment new. One of the air bridges even went to an airport in Wales. The signs were extremely popular as well. They went all over the world. But there's some great examples of circular economy in this sale as well. We took some of the light fittings and we remanufactured those into desks. We had some commemorative paperweights made from the railings there as well. But probably the most inventive of all, one of the archways was sold and it turned up in a slightly different guise 1 year later at the Royal Academy's summer show. And it transpired that it was Banksy who purchased it, added a few letters and a rat at the bottom, and given us this fantastic auction example of circular economy in action. The great thing about auctions is that it's not just the exciting high value assets that get sold and find the best value there. You've got some F1 cars we worked on a few years ago. You've got this large broadcast sale, cameras, lenses that we've just completed. But the beauty of circular economy is that it's about trying to find an avenue for assets that are not quite so desirable. So chairs, a bicycle pump down there, sinks, smaller items that if we engage with the potential buyers, if we seek them out and find them, then we tend to find an outlet for these. It's not always sold. Sometimes we're donating the items, but we're keeping it out of landfill and finding it a second use. So it's still part of our priority. Some details there as well of what kind of assets can be sold through this process. And it's, broader than you might expect. So these are actually examples of circular economy in action from our most recent sale. We had some vegetable beds that one buyer made from some sideboards there. You've got a bar at a church fair made from surplus wood from the project. Signs have been taken as well. And even, believe it or not, one chap came and picked up the chemical toilet that was no longer required on site. Who knows? Maybe that is Banksy seeking for his next exhibition. Maybe we'll see that turn up as well in 1 year. We've obscured his face just in case anyway. But you're looking at a time of material shortages, rising fuel costs and global supply chain issues. These items can be in quite strong demand now. People have got to find alternatives to the cost of material rises. So this is an example of some of the reporting that we can do with our clients to say, the impact from a carbon perspective from this exercise. This can be external reporting or internal reporting. I should say there are different approaches. It's about finding the most appropriate methodology and being detailed with what you do. We are sometimes looking at what the equivalent carbon in a new item is. Other times we'll be accounting for the age of an item and saying, okay, might not be quite the equivalent carbon as selling or buying an equivalent new part. But we work with an external consultant on this to come up with the best and most fitting methodology for any asset that we're working on. Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Dan. For me, I think that's brilliant because it shows an amazing diversity and actually how CAGP and the auction industry more broadly can actually work in quite unexpected areas, which certainly I would never have appreciated before. So thank you very much for that, Dan. So our last presenter is Emma Pickup. Emma is Head of Sustainability at Saunders, who, as I mentioned before, kind of a very well-respected, leading fine art auctioneer in the UK, and Emma's going to talk about a little bit about what they do, but also about how they are really driving sustainability as an auctioneer. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much. I will start just by giving a little bit of background about Sorters. So Sorters are one of the UK's leading regional auction houses, operational in the North Essex area since the late 18th century. We now also maintain a valuations office in Hertford and a central London gallery where we conduct preview events and exhibitions. We specialise in fine art and antiques from across the ages, conducting on average of 45 sales each year, and our sales range in disciplines from antique and classic contemporary furnishings, Asian art, jewellery, 20th century design, and modern and contemporary art. And we are very much committed to having a positive social and environmental impact, so much so that sustainability has been at the core of our business for many, many years. The very building that is home to our head office and auction rooms was specifically designed and built with sustainability in mind. Its timber frame was sourced from sustainably managed forests in Scandinavia, filled with locally sourced straw bales, all held in place under a cedar shingle roof. And at the time of opening in 2008, it was the largest straw bale building in Europe, winning us an award from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So as auctioneers, we naturally support the global objective to reduce waste and the impact of landfill by passing unwanted items to new owners who will treasure them. We are in many ways the ultimate reuse industry and an integral component of the circular economy. And now with all of the evidence to support that buying secondhand has notable ecological benefits, we very much strive to promote this message in all that we do. We partnered with Antiques Are Green, the movement launched in 2009 to educate consumers on the green credentials of buying secondhand antique and vintage items, and the original carbon footprint comparison that they completed on an antique chest of drawers versus a modern made chest of drawers demonstrated that the annual emissions of an antique or vintage item can be as little as 1/16 of a new equivalent. This research has very much progressed, and we're now currently working with data and statistics from the Auction Technology Group's Carbon Impact Report, which was released earlier this year. And this demonstrates the carbon savings achieved from a range of commonly bought auction items. While the very nature of what we do is considered green, we also know that many of our business practices contribute heavily to our carbon emissions. For example, the printing and dispatch of marketing materials and our shipping and logistics. And this is why we have taken active steps to tackle key issues. We have enhanced our recycling practices with clearer waste segregation around our sites and storage facilities. We have transitioned away from paper transactions, utilising our back office software system to capture digital receipts on client, digital signatures on client receipts and so on. And it's also about carefully selecting suppliers that we work with based on their sustainability merits. We have partnered with Carbon Footprint Limited, who are an award-winning independent emissions auditor, to collate and analyse data on our 2021 business activities. And this was in order to complete an initial greenhouse gas assessment in accordance with Part 1 of the ISO 14604, which looks at our Scope 1 and 2 emissions and also partial Scope 3 emissions. So we were looking at our site utilities, the movement and storage of our consignments, outsourced logistics for our delivery service, mileage claimed by our staff, and also the impact of home working arrangements, which was very much prominent during the pandemic. And what this means is that we are now a carbon assessed organisation, and we've been able to publish our 2021 emissions at 782.7 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. This has helped us identify our most significant emission sources, enabling us to set ourselves a plan for improvements in carbon reductions over the coming months and years. And I'll leave it there ahead of questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emma. I mean, it's great to see. I mean, obviously sustainability, we all talk about it now, but it's great to see that Sorters were doing a lot about it a long time ago with the new building, and great to see them sort of embracing carbon footprint calculation, which for anyone who's ever tried to do it or been involved in it, is a really, really tricky thing to do. And the first step is to measure and then to look to reduce and then offset what's left. So it's fantastic to see Sorders on making great efforts to do that. So just a reminder, we've got some questions which I'm going to start putting to the panel, but if you do have any questions you would like to ask anyone, please put it in the chat and we'll put that to the panel. So my first question is for George, which is, how do you think the auction industry needs to respond to the challenge of the circular economy and also sustainability in a more broad context?
Thanks, Chris. Great question. I hope the presentation so far today has shown how much many of our auctioneers are already doing. So I think Sorders and CA Global Partners should be, get huge applause for the hard work they're putting into it, and Sorders' long track record for spreading the message as well. I think that's probably our biggest challenge, is that there's still auctioneers out there who aren't singing that message and possibly not realizing what an important part they do play in the circular economy. Again, as Emma mentioned, things like Antiques Are Green have been a great campaign in the fine art and antiques industry, but we've got other niches we work in that are probably slightly trickier to really understand the circular economy benefits. Our car auctioneers, for example, I think some of them might feel they're not quite as sustainable as some of the other sectors, but actually a great example from this week, we've got an auction house that are selling a 1988 Mitsubishi Shogun. I don't know how many Mitsubishi Shoguns were manufactured back in those days, but I can guarantee that the vast majority of them ended up on the scrap heap. This particular one has been in the same family ever since. It's in immaculate condition and it's going to sell for several £1,000s. And what an amazing message to show to people that if you look after things and cherish things, they can be valuable in the future. And you're also obviously helping the circular economy. We all hear the news about electric cars, but I think it's it's well known now that if you buy a brand new electric car, that car needs to survive a very long time before it really is having a positive benefit. And I think auctioneers can really push that message that if things are looked after, cherished and valued, then they are going to have value in the future as well. So I think there's an awful lot we can keep doing to educate people out there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, George. Fabulous answer. And actually on the electric car front, it's actually 70,000 miles you need to do in your electric car before you've paid back the embodied carbon in the manufacture of that car. So they're a good thing. They're a good thing, but only when a car needs replacing. So that's a good point. So just to follow up on that, another question, which is, what can Bidpath themselves do to even more drive the circular economy and sustainability?
I'll pick up on that one again, but I think working with our auctioneer partners around the world, I think the more we do to come together as an industry is a good thing. And that's probably not just us working with our clients, but working with other software providers or other service partners to the industry. I think rather than being competitive with each other, the more we can pull together and spread the word of how green auctions are and what a great job they're doing. I think hopefully we can make more goods transact and be sold through auction and keep them in the circular economy. Again, as Dan mentioned on many of his industrial case studies, definitely in previous years, an awful lot of wastage on projects. Items that didn't go to auction wouldn't find homes. I think if that message can get out there to businesses that if you've got assets that need to be sold, if you put them through an auction mechanism, there's always a buyer for something out there. As we always say, one person's junk is somebody else's treasure. And that really is true across almost every sector we ever see.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, totally agree. Collaboration is so important. The challenges we face as a society in terms of sustainability cannot be solved by any one person or any one company. It takes a whole effort of everyone collaborating together across the whole industry to really make the big changes required. So thank you very much for that, George. I've got a couple of questions now for Emma, which is, so the first one is, you've clearly done an awful lot of work to drive sustainability, which is amazing to see. So, but the question is, what do you do next? How do you take that on to the next level?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the results of our carbon footprint assessment means that we've identified our most significant emission sources. So we now have these as priority focus areas for the coming months to address. We know that 74% of our emissions were shipping and logistics. So we are now looking closely at how and where we store and to try and minimise the movement of consignment as much as possible. 20% of our annual emissions was outsourced air freight for the under our delivery service. So we are working with our delivery partner to try and offer more sustainable options for clients when it comes to choosing how their lots are delivered. Obviously, we now need to think about revisiting our scope 3 emissions, which will look at the emissions generated from our procurement of goods and services. For example, our use of the Royal Mail Postal Service for mailing marketing materials. And that will give us a much sort of more comprehensive picture of our overall annual emissions in terms of what we need to be doing to reduce and offset. We're looking at our infrastructure around our buildings. So one of the projects that we're looking at the moment is replacing all of our internal lighting with energy efficient LED lighting. That should save us a potential 13 tonnes of CO2 equivalent each year. So quite a big chunk of our annual emissions would be saved, as well as obviously from a cost saving perspective as well, which is very much hot topic at the moment for energy bills. We'd also like to install electric vehicle charging sockets on sites. That's something that we've been looking into in terms of getting site surveys and keeping sort of on top of all the latest releases in terms of technology, so that we know that we're working with the best possible solution for us and for our clients, because we're hoping to be able to move towards more of a sort of an electric vehicle transit fleet for at least sort of value, for valuers going out on appointments and for local deliveries. We'll be looking at any potential offsetting that we can do in the interim as well. So that's something that we're also sitting down to discuss this week, actually.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots going on, obviously, keeping you busy. So just one more question, Emma, for you, which is often sustainability initiatives start off with like one or two people really driving it, and just be interesting to know how, what you've managed to do to engage the rest of the team and the rest of the business in sustainability and circularity and really driving that.
Yeah, sure. So I think involving our workforce from the offset was something that was really important. So when I started the project, I initiated it by getting feedback from colleagues on areas of the business they felt were in need of improvement, and this sort of generated a list of really interesting ideas that we've now been able to sort of bounce around, and some that we've been able to easily rectify. And I think it's very much about sort of keeping the wider team regularly updated with progress, so that they feel a sense of involvement and inclusion and also responsibility. But something else that we have sort of realised is that it's important to encourage your workforce and your staff to think about sustainability beyond the company walls. So we are now proud to be an accredited Climate Perks employer. And Climate Perks is an employee benefits scheme that sees staff entitled to an additional 2 days paid annual leave each year if they opt to travel via land or sea as opposed to flying when they book their holidays. But it's about encouraging them to travel sustainably outside of work, basically. Despite less than 1 in 5 of the world's population having ever stepped inside a plane, flying is very much the fastest growing contributor to climate change globally. And we recognise the need for behaviour change to play a role in reducing aviation emissions, and in turn, workplace innovations to facilitate such behaviour change.
Brilliant. That sounds like a great initiative. I've not actually heard of that one first. The Bidpath team are sick of me going on about a plant-based diet as well, so we won't go there. So moving on, thank you for that, Emma. And a question for Dan, which is, clearly you've got lots of great case studies of the work that CAGP have done, but what industries do you think that CAGP can really add value to? I think
there's quite a big scope. As you say, we cover a lot of different industries already. We've worked in recent years in broadcast, heavy manufacturing, food, laboratories, test and measurement equipment. Any industry where there is relatively large amounts of capital equipment is going to see massive benefit from this. I think one of the factors that companies should consider is that it's very often that a company will come to us because they're closing a facility or a site. They recognize a problem there and they've got to deal with it. But I don't think that there's so much recognition when, day-to-day surplus. As we mentioned, when you look at it, you've often got 10 to 20% of your assets, industrial assets, are surplus. So, allowing for that, there should be more conversations with companies to say, actually, these could be moved out into the wider economy and allow other companies and even developing countries to benefit from these items that are, sitting there costing you money. And the same on the inventory side as well. Inventory is moving quickly through companies, to stop and take a look at it to find out exactly what is actually needed and what's not, I think is, pretty important for most companies to look at and assess.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. I mean, the scope's just enormous, isn't it? And one last question, which is for Nicolette, which is, the auction industry is obviously doing loads to drive circular economy, but it's just like overall, what do you think are the key things that the industry can do more of to drive, circular economy, but also sustainability more broadly?
I mean, I think getting more people to buy, getting, kind of like you said earlier, Chris, auctions are kind of one of those things where if you're in that world, you know a lot about it, but if you're not, it's not really something that you consider as a mode of consumption. So I think the main thing that you can really, really do is spread the word about auctions. What we're doing at Bidpath, it's making things easier, making it easier for people to participate in auctions online. You can get, like Dan was saying, there was bidders from, I think, 51 countries at that Heathrow auction. So just the sheer fact of having the accessibility to an online auction, it just opens it up so much more for people anywhere and everywhere to take part in it. So they just need to know about it. So I would say that's the main key thing to do. And also, as Dan mentioned, I actually was one of the bidders for Heathrow Paperweight. So I just thought I'd show everyone that people do actually buy these things and want them. So there is absolutely always a use for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Nicolette. I mean, it's a great finishing point there with the Heathrow Paperweight. And absolutely right. It's when I go back to my marketing days, we would call it category growth. It's about making the whole industry bigger, and that's good for everyone in that industry as well, rather than it being a kind of competition, taking bits out of each other, make the whole industry bigger, more powerful, and everyone wins within that. It's a classic sort of win-win situation. So I think we've exhausted all the questions. So thank you very much for those. I'd like to thank the panel for taking the time and effort and prepare for this. Certainly, I think the industry is amazing. I've learned so much. It's got so much potential. I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time to attend this webinar. I hope it's been interesting. I hope you've found some new things out about the industry. If you want to follow up with any of the speakers, they can be contacted via the websites of the companies. So it's bidpath.com, cagp.com, or sorda.co.uk, and I'm sure the speakers would welcome further discussions and just any contacts through that. So thanks again to the speakers. Thank you to everyone who's attended. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we'll draw to a close now. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.